Good morning, Mr. Deaterly.
Good morning, Mr. Kessler.
Can you tell the jury your name, please?
My name is Zachary Deaterly,
And Mr. Deaterly, where were you born?
Sarasota, Florida.
And where did you grow up?
Nokomis, Florida.
And where did you graduate high school?
Pineview School.
And is that located here in Sarasota?
Yeah, it's located in Osprey.
Did you engage in any extracurricular activities while you were in high school?
Yeah, I was a rower.
And did you have any animals while you were growing up?
Couple.
What kind of animals did you have?
As a little kid, we had a Cocker Spaniel mix, who was more mixed than Cocker Spaniel. Then when Winston passed, we went for a few years without a pet, and we adopted Kara, who was a little 11-pound. We'll call her a super mutt. She was everything. Then she went along with her for a few years. My parents adopted Molly, who was a schnoodle.
And did your grandfather, D. Deaterly, have any animals?
Yeah, he had a large yellow lab named Mac.
And how often would you see Mac?
Once a week at least.
And did you have friends and family that had dogs while you were growing up?
Yeah, it seems like everyone had a dog.
Did you go to college?
Yes, sir.
Where did you go?
The Florida State University.
Did you graduate with any degrees?
Yes, sir. Criminology and Criminal Justice, Bachelor of Science, and I have a minor in entrepreneurship.
And what year did you graduate college?
2014.
When you were in college, were you involved in any clubs or extracurricular activities?
Yeah, I was a member of the RAFSU.
And what type of club is that?
It's a competition shooting club.
And what are some of the stuff that, or some of the firearms that you would shoot at the club?
We would shoot semi-automatic pistols at steel plates, timed.
And how often would you shoot firearms there with the club?
There was a point I was shooting about 3 times a week.
And as a member of that club, did you receive any additional firearm training?
Yeah, right about the time I got my concealed carry permit, when I turned 21, the range we shot out of was run by Leon County Sheriff's deputies. And one of the gentlemen, who's actually a Fish and Wildlife officer, was offering an advanced safety course for concealed carriers.
And did you take that
I
course?
participated in that, yes.
And when you graduated college in 2014, what day of the week did you graduate?
It was on a Saturday.
And what did you do 2 days later on a Monday?
Went to work.
Where at?
My father's company.
And is that located here in Venice?
Yes, sir.
When you were attending Florida State University, were you around animals?
A lot, yes.
You were around a lot of animals. What kind of animals were you around?
Dogs, cats, someone I knew had a prairie dog. A little bit of everything you see in college.
And did your friends have any dogs?
Yes.
Did they have any particular type of dog?
A lot of pit mixes.
Did you also have any family members that lived in Tallahassee at the time you were attending university?
Yes, I had we call her a cousin. She's not actual blood, but it's a cousin. It's family.
And what type of animal did she have?
She had a lab pit mix named Jasmine.
And how often would you interact with Jasmine?
She'd go out of town once a month or so, and I'd go over, feed the dog, walk the dog, hang out with the dog, just so she wasn't lonely.
And did you ever live with anybody that had animals?
Yeah, my roommate senior year had a pit boxer mix.
And how long did you live with him for?
2 full semesters and a little bit of the summer.
Did you have any girlfriends while you were in college?
Yes, and she had a pit bull as well.
And how long were you around that pit bull for?
We'll say 6 months we dated.
And how often during that 6 months?
I was there every day.
So you're familiar with what we're calling here today's pit bulls, correct?
Yes.
And are you familiar with what they look like?
Yes.
During your time at Florida State University, did you ever have any bad experiences with the pit bulls that you were around?
None.
When you would go over to spend time with Jasmine, would anything happen when you would go over there?
Well, when you open the door in a darkened apartment, a dog is naturally going to sort of growl a little bit, wonder who you are, but as soon as you hit the light, they say, "Jasmine, stop that, you know who I am."
What would she do?
Immediately turn into a wiggly mess.
What's your current occupation?
I'm a machinist and metal fabricator.
And how long have you been engaged in that occupation for?
The Monday after I graduated college.
Okay. Do you know Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
How do you know Mr. Jacobson?
He was a travel and drinking buddy of my grandfather's.
Okay. Did you ever spend any amount of time with Mr. Jacobson?
Him personally, no. I've been in the same room as him, but I've never hung out. I don't know him that well.
Prior to the incident in November of 2016, had you ever engaged in any conversations with Mr. Jacobson?
Other than, hi, how are you? No. Never a direct, to a point conversation.
Prior to November of 2016, had you ever seen Mr. Jacobson with his dog Candy that you know of?
I had not.
And prior to November of 2016, was there ever a time that you yourself interacted with the dog Candy that you know of?
I had never met that dog before.
I want to turn to the incident that occurred on November 18th, 2016. On the date of the incident, how old were you?
I was 24.
And the incident, where did it occur?
220 Llewellyn Lane, which is my family's property that we've had my entire life. I grew up out there
Are you familiar with that property?
intimately.
Let me go ahead and pull up. Exhibit 35, please. This is a survey of the property located at 220 Llewellyn Lane. Are you familiar with that survey?
I am.
So go ahead and describe this property for the jury.
Okay, so it's roughly 11 acres on Roberts and Lyons Bay. Heavily wooded. There's only one small house on there. There's shell paths interlaced throughout it. It's incredibly vegetated and lush. And when this incident happened, it was pre-Hurricane Irma, so we still had a lot of brush and foliage still hanging.
So was the property heavily wooded?
Very much so.
And was the property dense with vegetation?
Yes.
And how often would you visit the property prior to the incident?
Be over there a couple times a week and sometimes spend weekends over there at the cabin.
And what was the purpose of visiting the property?
Well, like I said, it's lushly vegetated. It's gorgeous. It looks like a park, and we had sometimes had problems with people coming on. Oftentimes they just wanted to look around. We had also found evidence of partying, campfire remnants and beer bottles and such. So just walk around so people would see headlights shining through the trees and see people moving around the property, so it didn't look necessarily uninhabited.
On the date of the incident, what time of the day did you arrive at the property?
Early evening, late afternoon, early evening.
And what were you doing at the property that day?
I was waiting.
Waiting for who?
My ex was coming up from her house. We were gonna park her car at the lot, get in mine, and drive to the airport to pick up one of my family members.
And why were you driving to the airport to pick up one of your family members?
My mother had knee surgery that morning, and she was not reacting well to the pain pills. So my dad was supposed to be the one to drive up and do the pickup at the airport, but he was staying with his wife. So he said, guess what, you get to drive to the airport.
So ultimately, you were chosen to go to the airport to pick up the family member?
I was voluntold, yes.
And when was it decided that you would pick up that family member?
Earlier, probably 10 to 12 o'clock.
That same day?
That same day, yes, sir.
So before 10 or 12 o'clock on the date of the incident, before that time, you didn't think that you were going to go to the property?
No, I did not.
Let's talk about when you arrived at the property. When you enter into the property, how do you enter into the property?
There's a large wood gate. You got to punch a code in, opens up, and you can either go left and that will take you to the boathouse on the property where the small boat hangs. You can sort of go left and then right, and that goes down towards the lower part. There's sort of two elevations on the land, and that's, you sort of drive down, it's almost a hill, almost. And
After, sorry.
and if you go right immediately, it takes you to the cabin. I went right, that's where I usually park my vehicle.
Okay, so on the date of the incident, you drive through the wooden gate and you parked your vehicle, correct? When you arrived at the property and parked your vehicle, did you see any vehicles at the property?
Immediately, no.
Okay, at what point in time, well, let me ask you this, did you ever come to find or discover that there was a vehicle at the property?
Sometimes yes, sometimes you'd see the maintenance crew there.
I'm talking about on the date of the incident.
On the date, no.
Okay. At any point in time, did you realize that there was a vehicle on the property at the date of the incident?
Yeah, after I parked my vehicle, gotten out, I think I went in and used the restroom in the cabin and sort of saw through the trees a truck parked down by the first T-dock.
And if we can blow up the survey, this second page, we'll turn to the second page. Actually, let's go back to page 1. My apology. Can we zoom in on the docks? And when you're referencing the T-dock, which dock are you referencing on that photo?
I'm right at the top one, the northmost one. Well, I don't have annotation here, but the northernmost one.
Your Honor, would it be possible for, thank you.
Yes, that one.
Okay. Did you expect there to be anyone at the property when you arrived?
No. It wasn't uncommon to see people there, but I didn't expect anyone.
Your Honor, if we can switch back to the monitor. I know you turned annotation on, but I think we have to switch back.
I've got it on mine.
Okay. And at what point was it that you recognized, or that you realized there was a vehicle on the property?
After I'd come out of the house, I looked down sort of through the trees and brush and vines and saw a pickup truck parked down by that first dock.
And did you recognize the vehicle?
Initially, no.
Was there a point in time when you recognized the vehicle?
Yeah, you walk down and around. You sort of have to take a roundabout way to get there because of a large, it's a swamp, basically. We've never gotten the drainage right in that area, so you can't walk through it.
Okay.
It's a mess.
And at what point did you recognize whose vehicle it was?
As I turned the corner, I saw Island Building Company on the side of the truck, so then I knew that was Mr. Jacobson's.
So you knew that to be Mr. Jacobson's company?
Yes.
Your Honor, this would be very helpful for the witness's testimony. The annotation is still not on the screen. I think when we flipped it over, it got rid of the exhibit for some reason.
You want the annotations on?
Correct, Your Honor. And then it goes to the blurry screen.
I've only got it on and off. You want me to call IT?
If you wouldn't mind, Your Honor.
John, we're trying to do annotations on one of his, when I hit it, it takes off the image. Being operated from the laptop. Okay. He's going to a closet. I hope that's a good sign. So this may take a few minutes. Let's let the jury retire.
All rise, jurors exit.
Your Honor, can we be in a brief recess?
Sure.
Thank you.
We'll take 10.
Perfect.
All rise, court's in a 10-minute recess.
Yes.
I have to have my granddaughter do my PowerPoint, so I'm really technologically phobic. We got everybody? All right. Be seated. Let's bring the panel back.
Folks coming back in from break, please make sure your cell phones are turned off.
Mr. Deaterly, if you could move the microphone a little closer to you,
All right, right there?
then you'll feel like it's in your face, which it probably is, but it'll help us.
All right.
Mr. Zachary? Once again, please make sure your phones are off.
All right, folks, you be seated. We think we have the technology problem solved. Mr. Kessler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Deaterly, you have in front of you the survey, in this case, of the property. Where was Mr. Jacobson's vehicle located on that survey?
Roughly about there.
And how was Mr. Jacobson's vehicle parked?
Tailgate towards the water, so by the water I mean like over here.
Okay. And did you see Mr. Jacobson?
Yes, he was walking down towards the dock.
And did you do anything once you realized it was Mr. Jacobson?
I called out to him. I said, "Hey, Rod." I had no interest in sneaking up on the guy.
And so why did you announce yourself to him?
Didn't want to scare him when I walked up behind him.
And did Mr. Jacobson respond?
He did sort of a half turn over his shoulder and sort of stared, I guess. I think he was processing.
And how far away from you was Mr. Jacobson at this point?
60 to 100 feet. I'm not sure. Sure. Draw it.
Sure, if you could just do a little circle where Mr. Jacobson was at that point.
About there.
Okay. And did you continue to walk towards Mr. Jacobson at this point?
Yeah, I continued to walk sort of along the length of his truck.
And why did you continue walking towards Mr. Jacobson?
I was gonna go say hello. It would be sort of impolite and maybe a little weird to just sort of stare and walk away.
And at this point, where were you in relation to Mr. Jacobson's truck?
Right beside it, sort of moving along the length of it. It's a large 3/4 ton pickup, so it takes a minute to get down the length of it.
Okay. Is there a pump house located on the property?
Yeah, it's labeled as wood shed on this because it's a wood shed, but it holds all the irrigation equipment for the property.
Okay. So if I reference pump house, what is the wood shed that's shown on the survey?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you'll know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And after you started continuing walking towards Mr. Jacobson, what happened next?
I heard sort of a crash come from behind the pump house, sort of like bushes rattling, bushes shaking.
And what did you see?
I turned around to see because it's not a usual noise you hear on that property. It's pretty quiet out there. Turned around, saw a large pit bull charging around the pump house.
And around the pump house, is there dense vegetation around the pump house?
There's sort of low bushes, like right up to the edge of it, but the dog was outside of those. There's also, you can sort of see on this map, like right in here, those are palmetto thickets.
Okay. And are they around the pump house?
Yes, they're towards the back of it.
And prior to this, did you know that there was a dog on the property?
I did not.
And how far away from the pump house were you when you first saw the dog?
30, 40 feet.
And was the dog approaching you?
Yes, very rapidly.
And was the dog unleashed?
It was completely unleashed.
And was the dog barking at you?
No, it was sort of snarling.
And can you tell the jury what you mean by snarling?
I described it in my deposition as it sounded like when like a ripstop canvas gives way finally, and it's a loud tearing noise. I think I've also described it to friends as who are more car guys types, that it sounds like a large motor without a muffler on it, just loud, deep. So you didn't hear it so much as feel it.
And was it loud?
Very.
And was the dog doing anything else?
It was running low to the ground, snarling, sort of head tucked, and had sort of a razor crest down the hair was raised down the center of its back and head.
So its hair was raised down the center of the back and the head.
Yes.
Did the dog coming out unexpectedly scare you?
Yes, I was certainly not expecting that walking around the property.
Did the dog's loud snarl scare you?
Yes.
Did the dog's mannerisms scare you?
Yes, I really had not seen anything like that in person before.
And how much time elapsed between you saying, "Hey, Rod," and announcing yourself to Mr. Jacobson, and the dog coming out of the bushes by the pump house?
Say 5 to 10 seconds.
And what did you do in response to the dog snarling and running at you?
I immediately turned to face it. I didn't want to turn my back on what I was starting to perceive as a threat, and sort of yelled at it, sort of, hey dog, hey dog. It was nonsensical, yes, but didn't know what else to do at the time.
And did it keep coming at you?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury if you yelled out to Mr. Jacobson?
Not at that point necessarily. When it got a little closer, I started yelling, Rod, get your dog, Rod, get your dog.
And can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson said anything to you at that time?
Nothing. It was absolute silence from behind me.
Can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson said anything to the dog at that time?
Nothing. No sit, no stay, nothing.
Can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson did anything to help you at this time?
Not that I saw, no, he did not. Didn't see anything. Didn't hear anything.
How close did the dog get to you initially?
First time, within 4 feet.
And did you do anything when it got close to you?
Yeah, the only reason I think it didn't get closer is because I kicked dirt and a shell at it. It's the paths there are like that crushed shell mixture that they sort of sell by the dump truck load. That's what they're all lined with. So I kicked that at it, so it had rocks and dirt flying at it. So it stopped and went back out, went away from me.
Were you wearing shoes on the date of the incident?
Yes, sir. I was in a very old pair of boat shoes.
And why did you kick dirt at the dog?
It seemed really unhappy with me. I don't know why. It seemed aggressive. And I wanted to go back to the palm thicket from where it came from and leave me alone so I could get out of there.
Can you tell the jury what the dog was doing while you were kicking at it? Kicking dirt at it?
It was continuing to snarl, and as it got in a little closer, it sort of snapped its jaw at me. It sort of got it. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen.
Was it continuing its loud snarl?
Yes.
And did it continue to snap its jaws?
Only when it was in close at me. It wasn't running around snap, snap, snapping. But when it would get close, to me, it would sort of try to, I don't know if it was trying to grab me or what, but it would pop its jaws at me.
And what did the dog do after you kicked dirt at it to scare it away?
Sort of went out and made it's not a loop, because that would sort of sound like it's round, but it sort of went out and back, like it was regrouping.
Okay, so using the color blue, at this point in time on the screen, go ahead and just do a little dot where you were standing at that point.
I was actually right there.
Okay. And when you say that the dog made a loop, can you annotate on the screen the direction that the dog went and made the loop?
It sort of came out and back.
Okay. And when the dog moved out toward the pump house, why didn't you try to retreat?
Because I really didn't have anywhere to go. It's actually a fairly narrow path between the truck and the pump house and the bushes there. And the property was a lot more overgrown at that time than when this survey was made. It was pre-Hurricane Irma, so it was overgrown. We had a lot of deadfall when that storm came through, so we cleaned out a lot.
And what did you,
Not mine.
Go ahead.
did the dog come back at you after it made the first loop?
Yeah, it came, so I sort of drew it there. Went back and came back in at me.
And did the dog ever stop running?
No, never stopped moving.
Was it still snarling when it came back at you?
Yes,
And as the snarl was continuing, were you growing more fearful?
yes,
Was the dog still quickly running at you?
yes it was.
And as the pit bull was continuing to quickly run at you, were you growing more fearful?
Yes, I wasn't sure why it was so intent on me.
Was the dog still snapping its jaws?
When it got in closer, yes,
And as the dog was continuing to snap its jaws, were you growing more fearful?
absolutely.
After this first loop, do you know where Mr. Jacobson was at this point?
I lost track of him. I was focusing on the dog trying at this point, I was pretty convinced it was trying to bite me. So I was purely focused on that. I didn't hear him, didn't hear anything from him.
And can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson said anything to you at this point?
He said nothing.
And can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson said anything to his dog at this point?
I heard no commands, nothing.
And did you observe Mr. Jacobson doing anything to get his dog under control at this point?
I didn't observe Mr. Jacobson, period. He was somewhere behind me.
And did Mr. Jacobson do anything to help you at this point?
He did nothing.
Did you say anything to Mr. Jacobson at this point?
At this point, I was screaming, "Rod, get your dog, Rod, get your dog, Rod, get your dog." I yelled myself hoarse. I could hardly talk the next day.
And can you tell the jury what you were feeling at this point in time?
Scared. This is the only time I had ever had an animal react to me that way. I mean, I'm 24 years old at the time and grew up around dogs. Never had that issue. It was strange. It was totally alien.
And after the first loop, how close did the dog get to you?
It got close enough where I was able to make contact with it when I kicked it. I kicked it in the side of the head as it came in at me.
So when it made the first loop, when it came back, you kicked it in the head?
It made a dash at me, yes, and I sort of moved to the side and kicked at it, and I think I got it on the side of the head or in the neck.
And how did the dog respond to the kick?
Well, it wasn't hurt because, let's face it, I'm not that big of a guy, and it's a pit bull. They're tough. But it was surprised, I think, that I had done something like that.
Did the dog back off away from you at that point?
Yeah, it moved off again in a pretty good clip and sort of came back out and around again.
Can you show the jury by annotating what you mean by it went out and came back again?
Well, it came sort of out like that. Maybe not quite out that far, but then it came in and worked in along that palm thicket there and back. And by that time, I had moved a little bit, trying to sort of get clear of the truck and open ground, so I had open sight lines. And I was about in there, facing outwards. This is south.
At that point in time, was the truck behind you?
Truck was to my left shoulder.
And as the dog was going out, making the second loop back, did you do anything to try to get away from the dog?
While I was yelling for Mr. Jacobson to get your dog, I really couldn't get away because the dog controlled everywhere to the south. If I had tried to get between the truck, I would have been pinned between trucks and the bushes. On the driver's side of the truck, it's a slippery mess. That's part of the drainage to that swampy area that's annotated on the survey. I really had nowhere to go, and if I had gone out to the dock, I'd have been pinned out at the end of the dock.
And when it came back on the second loop, it came back at you, correct?
I think we're on the third loop now.
Well, we're still on the second loop.
All
I'm
right.
talking about the second one. So it came back at you again.
Right?
Did it ever stop running?
No, it never stopped moving.
And at this time, was the pit bull still snarling at you?
Yes, it was.
And as the snarl was continuing, were you growing more fearful?
Yeah, nothing I was doing was working.
And was the dog still quickly running at you?
Yes.
And as the dog was continuing to quickly run at you, were you growing more fearful?
Yes.
Was the dog still snapping its jaws at this time?
When it would get close to me, yes, it would.
And as the dog was continuing to snap its jaws, were you growing more fearful?
Yes.
At this point, do you know where Mr. Jacobson was?
I have no idea.
At this point, did Mr. Jacobson say anything to you?
He didn't say a thing.
Can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson said anything to his dog at this point?
No commands, nothing.
And can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson did anything to try to get his dog under control at this point?
He did absolutely nothing.
Can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson did anything to help you at this point?
No help whatsoever.
Did Mr. Jacobson do anything that you could observe?
I think he was hiding behind me. I didn't see him. He was not in my line of sight. I couldn't see any part of him. Nothing out of my periphery, nothing.
And at this point in time, were you still yelling?
Yes.
And to whom were you yelling?
At this point, I probably intermittently get your dog, and partially just trying to make noise and look big, sound big, to maybe dissuade that dog to go away.
And did the dog get close to you again?
Yes, on this third time, it got in, and it didn't make a full run at me. It sort of stopped short and worked in and moved out.
And can you tell the jury what you mean by worked in and worked out?
It would approach me and sort of pop its jaws at me, and then I would give ground to get away, sort of back up just a little bit. And then as it was coming back on its haunches, I'd jump at it to try to get ground back and just make it think I was bigger than I was, that it didn't maybe want to have this, today. And that went back and forth a couple times. It was working in on me. It was looking for an opening. It was looking for, if I set a foot wrong, slipped, fell, I think. So,
And how close was the dog getting to you each time that it would come in at you?
inches.
And can you tell the jury what you were feeling at this point?
Terror. Nothing I was doing was working. I tried everything. Worked up every little idea that I could think of in the moment. I mean, you think you yell, you scream, you kick dirt at something, you actually kick it, it'll go away, but it didn't. You would think if the owner was right there, you'd start to hear sit, stay, candy, no. I didn't.
And as the dog was coming in and going back out, did you try walking backwards?
As far as I could, as soon as you get off that path, like I said, it's a muddy, swampy mess. I've fallen over in it before. It's sort of how I'm pretty familiar with the property. I've, gone the whole bonfire covered in mud because I slipped and fell there.
In using the purple color, can you identify the wet, muddy area that you're describing for the jury? And was it muddy on the date of the incident?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I think the irrigation had run the night before. So if any runoff from that, it makes its way down that driver's side of the truck along the side of the path. It's like sort of a slow-moving creek almost, and it ends up there in that low spot.
Was there a point in time when you stopped walking backwards?
Yeah, I had given too much ground when it had come at me, so I was nowhere to go.
Is that because you had the muddy area behind you?
Correct.
And when you stopped walking backwards, did the dog do anything?
It tensed. It tensed. It got even lower than it was, and it was reading me. And I just got this weird feeling that, all right, this is it. Here we go. Now this is where I'm going to get hurt.
And tell the jury what you were feeling at this point.
fear and sort of resigned to the fact that I was about to deal with an injury.
Did there come a point in time where you felt there was nothing more you could do?
Absolutely, then. I reached for my concealed pistol. As I've been taught, I keep it in a pocket holster. It's got like sort of a sticky substance on the outside of it to hold the holster pouch in your pocket so it doesn't come out with the firearm. And brought the revolver out and sort of anchored in, brought it down low into my hip because the dog was so close, and fired.
You said that the firearm you had was a revolver.
Yeah, it's a .38 Special Smith & Wesson J-frame, so 5-shot revolver, small for concealment.
And how many times did you shoot?
3 times total.
And can you explain to the jury why you shot from your hip?
Because if I had taken the time to extend and aim down the barrel of the sights, the dog was that close, I wouldn't have had time. And B, it was so close, I would have been over its backside. I would have been aiming over it.
Did you hit the dog on the first shot?
I didn't.
And did the dog run away after hearing the first shot?
It did not, and I was honestly surprised by that. It's
Can you tell the jury what the dog did after the first shot?
It kept coming. And I fired again.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. After the first shot, was the dog still baring its teeth at you?
Yes, and when snapping and continuing to snarl.
And did you observe Mr. Jacobson do anything after the first shot?
I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything from him.
And then you said there was a second shot, right?
Correct.
Did you hit the dog on the second shot?
I did not.
Did the dog run away after hearing the second shot?
Unfortunately, no.
And can you tell the jury what the dog did after the second shot?
It pressed its attack. It kept coming.
At this point in time, was the dog still baring its teeth?
Yes, and it was about on top of me.
Can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson did anything after you fired the second shot?
I heard nothing. I didn't hear anything. No sit, no stay, no cry of anger, nothing.
Did you shoot a third time?
I shot a third time.
And did you hit the dog with the third shot?
I did.
And how do you know that you hit the dog with the third shot?
It made a sort of a yip and rapidly moved away from me. It planted its front paws and turned around and ran.
At this time, where were you positioned on the survey?
I think I sort of right around there, because you get any further, you're into the mess. And the dog ran out and away from me, out and around, and his boat was on that side.
Okay. And after you shot the third shot, do you know where Mr. Jacobson was at that point?
Well, all of a sudden he appeared right behind me, and he said, "Did you just shoot my dog?"
Was Mr. Jacobson ever in your line of sight as you fired the gun?
He was never in my line of sight.
Can you tell the jury if you ever aimed your gun at Mr.
I
Jacobson?
never aimed my gun at him, ever.
Can you tell the jury if you ever fired your gun at Mr. Jacobson?
No, I never fired it at him.
Prior to you shooting the dog, can you tell the jury if Mr. Jacobson tried to help you at any time prior to shooting the dog?
He did nothing.
Zach, did you ever shoot the dog while it was running away?
No.
You said you shot 3 times, correct?
Correct.
How do you know you shot 3 times?
A few days later, when I sort of settled down and was ready to sort of more calm, I went to reload the firearm, and I found 3 expended cases in the cylinder. Revolver retains its shells. It doesn't eject them like a semi-automatic, so they were still there. So I found 3 rounds expended and 2 not, 2 live ammo.
I just want to be clear for members of the jury who may not be familiar with firearms. You said it was a 5-shot revolver that you had,
Correct.
and you said there were 2 rounds left when you went to reload it.
2 live rounds left, yes.
And can you explain to the jury why shell casings for the spent rounds wouldn't have come out of a revolver?
So a revolver works by, there's a cylinder that revolves as you pull the trigger. There's like a clockwork mechanism inside. So as you pull, it works this around and rotates a new round into place in front of the barrel. So it just continually spins. So you have to manually pull out the spent shell casings, what hold the bullets and powder, to reload new rounds. So it retains. It's not like where you see in the movies where guy bang, 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 and you see brass flying out of the side of the weapon. It's not like that. It retains the spent shell casings.
Okay. If I can go ahead and get Exhibit 3 pulled up, the 3rd page of Exhibit 3. I took a picture, yeah. And if I can get the last 2 paragraphs blown up, please. Zach, I'm going to turn your attention to the Sheriff's Office police report from Deputy Achille. In the report, Deputy Achille stated that you had told him that you shot so fast and the second 2 shots were a reaction. Can you tell the jury why you may have told the deputy something different than what you're testifying to here today?
Time brought clarity on the issue. They talked to me the day after it happened. I hadn't slept that night. I was shaken up. I hadn't eaten. I had 0 appetite. I suspect I was probably dehydrated. I curled up into a ball, and it was awful. I mean, I had never killed an animal before this. I hope to never again. I was shook. It was terrible. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't go there with the idea that this would even happen. It was terrible. It was completely awful. That's the long and short of it. I was shook up when those police officers, you met Deputy Achille, he was the deputy, then he's sergeant now, and his co-worker, I guess, came and sat at my kitchen table that I had grown up at and were asking me about a shooting. It was, with time, got some rest, got some food in me, and sort of rehashed on what had happened, and that brought, okay, this is how it went.
In all the actions that you took, that you described to the jury here today, were those actions taken solely to repel the dog from attacking you?
So I would have been so happy if it had ran away after the first shot that missed it.
Did you ever do anything during the course of this incident to inflict harm or fear in Mr. Jacobson?
I know.
After the incident occurred, after you had to shoot the dog and it ran down to the dock, did Mr. Jacobson say anything to you after the incident?
He said, immediately after, did you just shoot my dog? And it's in the record, and he testified that I said, well, you're damn right I did. I did say that. I was scared. I was shook up. I had no idea what had just happened. I believe I called him an idiot for having the pit bull unleashed on our property.
And we can take down Exhibit 3, thank you. And why did you say that to Mr. Jacobson?
Because the dog had run out of the bushes at me on property that I grew up on. I felt safe out there. That was, Mr. Timpanic loves the phrase happy place. It was my happy place. It's an amazing piece of property. And I had spent a lot of time out there. It was a lot of stress relief out there. Just sit and enjoy. And it had been ruined. I went there with the intention of having a nice evening, walk around the property and go up and pick up a family member and have a nice dinner. And here I was getting attacked, and I'm aware of there's legal ramifications when you discharge a firearm. So.
And were you upset at that point because the dog was not leashed?
Yes. We're not here today if that dog had been on a leash.
And what is the last thing that Mr. Jacobson said to you?
You're gonna be in big trouble if this dog dies, and he like pointed at me and was threatening. You're gonna be in big trouble if this dog dies.
And did you say anything back to Mr. Jacobson in response?
No, there's nothing to say.
And at this point, what did Mr. Jacobson do?
He put the dog in his truck, got in, and I mean, not eloquent for his, he peeled out. He stepped on the gas as hard as he could and sped out of the property.
So he quickly left the property?
Yes,
When Mr. Jacobson left the property, did you have occasion to observe his truck leaving the property?
I did.
As you observed his truck leaving the property, did you see any damage to his truck?
I didn't.
Did you ever shoot at the truck?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever shoot the truck?
No.
Did you ever shoot in the direction of the truck?
No.
You heard Mr. Jacobson testify during his testimony that the dog was underneath his truck when you shot it. Is that the case?
It was not. It was in the bushes behind that pump house.
Did you believe at the time of shooting the dog that you had to use deadly force against the dog?
I had run out of every other option that I had, so yes,
Were you fearful that the dog was going to inflict harm on you?
I was.
And at that point in time when you shot the dog, did you believe that you had done everything that you could to have repelled the attack other than shooting?
Absolutely. I'd done absolutely everything.
And did you believe that the only way to prevent you from getting hurt was by shooting the dog?
Yes.
Did you want to shoot the dog?
Lord, no.
Did you want-
Absolutely not.
Did you want to cause harm to the dog?
Absolutely not.
Can you describe for the jury how you felt after the incident occurred?
I was shaking. I was terrified. I had a massive adrenaline dump. I'd never had something like that happen before. I mean, I've been in a few car wrecks before, but nothing like that. Nothing that sheer terror, fight or flight that was going through me right then.
And after the incident occurred, can you tell the jury what you did?
I called my ex and said, you don't need to come up here, something happened, go home. And I called my father and told him what had happened on the property. He immediately told me, or get back here. So I drove back to their house. It's like 5 minutes away.
So after the incident occurred, you called your dad and you went back to your house?
Correct.
And can you tell the jury what you did when you got home?
He sat me down at the kitchen table and said, well, okay, what happened? And went through what I just said, and basically he tried to get liquid in me. Handed me a cup, and it was a good thing it was a Tervis, because I was shaking so bad I would have spilled. After that, we went through that. I sat, tried to gather thoughts for a minute, and we still had someone coming into the airport, so my father said, all right, you're coming with me. And we got in the truck and went up and picked my family member up.
And when you arrived at your house and you were seated at the table, can you describe to the jury what you were feeling at this point?
Everything. It was fear, sadness, a little bit of anger at what had happened. I was shaking. I was jittery. I could barely spit sentences out. I mean, I know I'm probably a stuttering mess up here. Sorry, Richard. But it was bad. I had had every bit of adrenaline dump into my system, and I was coming down from it.
And who did you tell about the incident?
Initially, my family.
Okay. And then I believe you testified that at that point in time, your father said, come on, let's go. We have to go to the airport.
Correct.
Did you and your father go to the airport to pick up the family member?
We did.
Who drove?
My dad. I was in no shape.
And can you tell the jury what you mean by you were in no shape to drive?
I was still shaking. I was still messed up. I was bad. I won't say I wasn't seeing straight or anything like that, but I was not. It would have been unsafe for me to get behind the wheel.
And the original plan was for you to go to the airport to pick up the family member, correct?
Correct.
Do you have your concealed weapons permit?
I do.
How long have you had your concealed weapons permit?
Since right after I turned 21, which is legal age to get it.
And prior to obtaining your concealed weapons permit, did you take any classes?
State of Florida requires you take, I forget how many hours it is, but requires that you take a law and proficiency class to get your concealed carry permit, to even qualify you to take the background check.
And did you take that?
Yes, I passed the background check from Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
And did you ever take any extended instruction in how to use a firearm?
Yes, as I was getting the permit, they were offering the advanced concealed carry class through RAFSU, through the range that we shot out of. I figured, you know, if you're going to carry this thing, you might as well know how to use it properly, use it safely, so you're not a threat to yourself or society.
And do you routinely carry a concealed firearm?
Pretty much wherever I go, yes.
And is that for safety reasons?
Safety reasons, yes.
Other than the dog in this incident, have you ever shot any other animals?
No, sir.
Have you ever hunted animals?
No.
Have you ever shot any people?
No.
Have you ever threatened to shoot someone?
Absolutely not.
Have you ever threatened to shoot another animal either before or after this incident?
I have not.
And Mr. Deaterly, from your testimony, I take that this was a traumatic event for you.
It was incredibly traumatic.
Can you tell the jury how this incident has affected you?
I mean, on the emotional, I feel absolutely terrible that a dog had to die that day. I didn't want that to happen. I mean, I'm an animal. I like animals. I don't even have a particular problem with pit bulls. That one, I had never had an animal treat me like that before. I mean, even you walk into a house and the animal's new and it's curious, little, maybe a little standoffish, all that. You talk sweet to it and maybe try to bribe it with a milk bone and make friends. But there was none of that with this, and I don't know why for the life of me.
Thank you, Mr. Deaterly. Your Honor, that's all the questions I have at this time.
Cross, Your Honor.
All right.
Let's be clear for the record. You shot and killed Candy the dog, correct?
I did.
And you just stated that you felt terrible about it, correct?
I did.
Yet you felt so terrible that immediately after the incident, you called Mr. Jacobson a fucking moron, correct?
Yes, I did.
You felt so terrible, you called him a goddamn idiot, correct?
Mr. Timpan, can you please lower your volume? Can we just have a conversation, please?
Did you call him a goddamn moron, correct?
I did.
You felt so terrible immediately after shooting Candy the dog, you said, "You goddamn right I did," correct?
I did not say that.
Did you say, "You're damn right I did"?
Yes.
Okay. You stated on direct that you're not that big of a guy, correct?
5'7".
How much do you weigh, Mr. Deaterly?
Oh, that's rude of you. But right now, about 220.
And in 2016, how much approximately did you weigh?
We were doing keto at the time, so I was about 190 pounds, I think.
Candy the dog did not bite you, correct?
Thankfully, yes. That's the truth.
Candy the dog did not jump on you, correct?
Thankfully not.
Candy the dog didn't even get within 2 feet of you, correct? With the exception of when it, as you stated, when you kicked at her.
On the third pass that I made in, it was getting within inches, and then I was giving ground to open the gap up between us.
Okay. And Mr. Deaterly, you stated earlier that you, can I have the survey pulled up with the annotations, please?
Yeah, I don't have any problem pulling it up, but the issue is that if Mr. Tepanik's looking for the prior annotations, given the technology, we can't pull that up, but we did take a picture of it to send to IT. So if IT wanted to email me the
I don't
picture.
think he's wanting the annotations.
Just the survey is fine.
We have no problem pulling it up, Your Honor.
This is your grandfather's property, correct?
My family's.
No. Whose property does this belong to? It belongs to D. Deaterly, correct?
You're wrong.
It belongs to Spring Release, LLC, correct?
Did you do your research, Mr. Tepanik? There's 3 officers of that. My father is one of them. My grandfather was one of them. He's since passed. And my aunt.
Okay, I'll rephrase. Are none of those individuals you, Mr. Deaterly?
None of those individuals are me.
So would it be fair to say that it was your grandfather's property or your father's property or your aunt's property, correct?
Yes, they owned it jointly.
Okay. And you said earlier that Mr. Jacobson was not paying attention to you whatsoever, correct?
Well, I raised his attention when I said, "Hey, Rod." He was walking away from me, and then I made myself known.
Okay. And could we zoom in a little bit for this? Or can I do that here? Oh, no, I created that. Zoom in on the shell path, please, where could Mr. Deaterly, can you real quickly just redraw where the truck was, please?
Roughly in there.
Okay. And it's your testimony today that Candy took 3 passes at you, correct?
Correct.
And you stated you had no ability to retreat from the situation, correct?
Correct.
And it's also your testimony that Mr. Jacobson, by your own admission, was down by the dock, correct?
Correct.
And so tell me, Mr. Deaterly, you could have ran to the dock, correct?
Yeah, but then I'm pinned at the end of the dock, and what do I do?
Wouldn't Mr. Jacobson be down by the dock?
He was within sight of me.
So, but that's not my question. By your own admission, he's walking towards the dock, correct?
He had stopped and turned.
Okay, so if you run towards him, that's towards the dock. You could have done that, correct?
I didn't want to take my eyes off the threat.
Okay. But also, additionally, you could have turned around, correct?
Turned around to where?
Towards the bush. Obviously, you can see the waist area, and that's perfectly understandable. But isn't that area right there, you could have easily walked to the right of the waist area?
No, like I said, that's the drainage to the waist area. It's very slippery and wet as well.
Okay. And you stated you fired 3 shots at Candy the dog, correct?
Correct.
You stated the first one didn't hit, correct?
That is correct.
You stated the second bullet didn't hit, correct?
That's correct.
And you stated the third did hit, correct?
Correct.
So, from your supplement, would it be fair to say that one's memory becomes details that... Oh, I'll strike that. Do you think over time people's memories get a little hazy? Or would... Correct?
Over long periods, yes.
Okay.
But in a
so,
traumatic...
no, that's enough.
Your Honor, I'd ask that he be allowed to finish his answer to the question.
Yeah, he can answer yes or no.
Okay. And would it be fair to say one's memory 1 day after the incident would be stronger than it is 5.5 years later, correct?
5.5, yes.
So, if I may bring up the supplement from the sheriff's office, same paragraph that was mentioned. Page 3, and then the paragraph, second to last paragraph, please. Could you please read the first paragraph aloud, Mr. Deaterly?
The suspect advised that the dog then ran away. He was not sure if he had hit the dog with any of the fired shots. When the suspect was asked if he shot at the dog as he ran away, the suspect stated, "I shot so fast that the second 2 shots were a reaction. I advised the suspect of this incident would be reviewed in detail further and that SSO would be in contact with them."
So you told law enforcement only 1 day after the incident, you weren't even sure if you hit Candy the dog, correct?
One day, yes, after I had not slept that night, after I had not eaten for a long period of time, and as I was, I'm going to say I was dehydrated.
But now, 5.5 years later, you're able to say that you hit Candy the dog with 3 shots, correct?
I believe
With a third shot.
I believe
Sorry.
I put that in my deposition, which was done more recently.
And additionally, you stated, well, get to the second sentence. I shot so fast, the second 2 shots were reaction. Would it be fair to say that based on what we just heard, that's a direct contradiction to that statement, correct?
You could say that, but as I have said, time brought clarity on the actual timeline of the events of the dog and how it had come at me and how I had fired.
Okay, so that 5.5 years later, you have clarity that you didn't have 1 day after it, correct?
1 day after, yes, but you're negating the took my deposition. That was, pretty close afterwards. So you're sort of twisting words on me, Mr. Tympanic.
Okay. And Mr. Deaterly, so you never saw Rod Jacobson until after you had fired the shots?
I saw him, announced myself, heard the dog, turned to face the dog, turned to face the threat, managed the threat until it ran away from me, and then he reappeared again behind me as if he was hiding behind me.
Okay. And you said, Mr. Jacobson, are you familiar with not particularly Candy, that Mr. Jacobson's wife and him would have a lot of animals?
I knew that they were my grandfather used the term animal hoarders. It's probably unfair. I knew they had a lot of dogs, cats, pigeons, whatever.
Would it be fair to say animal protectors?
I don't know.
Withdrawn, Your Honor. So, Mr. Deaterly, your testimony is that you don't know for sure Rod Jacobson was behind you, correct?
I have no idea where he was hiding at.
And would it also be fair to say that when law enforcement, you were here when Deputy Achille testified, correct?
I was here when Deputy Achille was here.
Yes. And did you not hear that he could not eliminate that he was adjacent to you, as Mr. Jacobson stated in his testimony, correct?
Well, seeing as he wasn't there and it's a he said situation, yes, that would make sense.
Okay. Fair enough. Mr. Deaterly, when you finally heard Rod Jacobson say, "Did you just shoot my dog?" how far away was he from you?
I was on the edge of the shell path towards the south of it. I was in the grass just a little bit, and he was on the shell path. So that path's 5-6 feet wide enough to barely back that truck down. So, and I assume he was standing dead in the middle of it, so 3 feet behind me.
A few feet behind you?
Yes.
So your testimony is that the dog that you've heard that he loves so much, instead of going to help it, he stands by and allows you to shoot him, correct?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's the exact
Okay.
problem.
Yet, I'd like to ask you about the firearm. Mr. Jacobson testified that immediately after the incident, you called him a fucking moron, a goddamn idiot, correct?
I called him that for having that dog off leash on our land.
And he also stated that you were waving your firearm at him, almost taunting him, correct?
I would never do that.
Really? And you would never, just like you would never call somebody a goddamn idiot after you just shot their dog?
I never said I would never do that.
Mr. Deaterly, your testimony includes that, and let me help summarize. The dog never bit you, correct?
Fortunately, that's true.
It wasn't, and you say there's a punch code to get onto the property, correct?
Correct.
And somebody who would come onto the property would need to be able to use that, correct?
If you wanted to come in with a vehicle, yes. If you could come in by water as well. The gates don't have, or the docks don't have a gate on them. Or as we saw with the split rail fence, you could go through that.
But since Mr. Jacobson had his vehicle there, he had to have used the punch code to get in, correct?
Correct.
And that's something he would have had, correct?
Yes.
You said you were resigned to getting injury, correct?
Correct.
But you were trying to get, by your own admission, you're trying to get Rod's attention, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, you didn't go towards Rod.
I didn't know where he was.
But didn't you state earlier you saw him walking towards the path, correct?
Yes.
And by your own admission, how many times you've been on the property before, prior to that incident?
Thousands.
So you would know exactly where he'd be heading, correct?
Calls for speculation, Your Honor.
I'll rephrase. You knew Mr. Jacobson docked his boat right at the end of the path, correct?
Objection, improper foundation, proper predicate, and that's something that goes way above direct.
I'll, go ahead.
Rephrase, or repeat, please.
Sure. You knew Mr. Jacobson docked his boat at the end of that shell path, correct?
I knew that is where he kept it. I don't know if it was there that day or not.
Okay,
Couldn't see to.
okay. But you knew, would it be fair to say you knew that's where usually his boat was?
Usually, yes.
And you usually knew that, and would it be fair to say that the two types of situation, primary, that Mr. Jacobson would be on the property, would be either to be on his boat or working on your grandfather's property, correct?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Overruled. Yeah,
I don't know Rod Jacobson, so I don't know what he would be doing. He could.
All right, that's fine. You stated earlier that he was a vacationing buddy and a drinking buddy, correct?
Correct.
Now, that mischaracterizes the witness's testimony, Your Honor, so I'm going to object to that question. It was the grandfather's drinking buddy and travel buddy.
I think that was.
Oh, yeah, I'll rephrase that. Rod Jacobson, by your own testimony, was your grandfather's vacation and drinking buddy, correct?
That's correct.
And you heard testimony from Mr. Jacobson that he was sometimes on the property and he did some, help around that property activities for your grandfather, correct?
Yes.
And you knew that he'd been out on the property numerous times, correct?
I was aware.
And would it be fair to say that if he's walking down that, can I pull up that survey? Just so we can see. And zoomed in at the end of the shell path, please. That, you obviously see this photograph.
Right.
And you know if he's walking in that direction, he's very likely walking towards his boat, correct?
That would make sense.
And would it make sense that, considering you said you were, 60 feet from him, correct?
Give or take, yes.
And you could have easily walked right to Mr. Jacobson where he was to potentially help you. You're already calling out to him, correct?
Yes, but I also didn't want to take my eyes off the dog that was running at me, snarling at me, so walk backwards?
No. Like you said, you're standing face to face. You draw the dot just so we can be able to... So you're face to face with the animal, correct?
Correct. Facing.
And you turning this way to the right, which would make sense, you're not taking your eyes off the animal, correct?
That would be wrong.
If you are Candy the dog, and I am you, and I turn right as the survey, I'm still being able to keep my eyes on you while still walking in the direction of the dog,
Objection,
correct?
calls for speculation.
Hold on. The witness can answer.
Dog was moving around. It was constantly moving, milling about, coming sort of from different directions. I didn't want to risk taking my full attention off of it.
Okay, that's fair. And yet, you make no effort to try, since you're calling out to, why did you call out to Rod?
The first time?
Yes, I know. When did you get your dog off me? Why did you call out to Rod specifically?
Because he was the only other person on the property. We don't have any witnesses to this incident. So,
So you assumed that it was Rod's dog, correct?
yes,
So that you knew that if you were able to, so would it be fair to say that you knowing that you could have got to Rod and Rod could have helped you out, correct?
I can't outrun that dog to get to him in time.
But you don't even need to outrun it, Mr. Deaterly. By the looks of it, it looks to be 20, 30 feet, correct?
I don't know. I don't know the scale of it. You'd have to.
You don't know the scale of a property you've been to thousands of times?
I'm not good with distance, honestly.
But you were good with distance when you said it came within 2 inches of you 5.5 years later, correct?
A little difference between 20 feet and 2 inches, Mr. Timpanik.
Oh, good, yes. 20, yeah, it was 20 and 24 inches and 26 inches. Good clarification. So you're talking about, I'm not good with distances, yet during the stress of the situation with a vicious pit bull allegedly tried to come at you, you're able to judge that it's 24 inches, correct?
I never said 24 inches.
You never said that in your deposition that it got within 24 inches? So we can, obviously, we're going to do the deposition thing now.
Sorry, you're narrating for yourself.
Oh, no, we'll come back to you, Mr. Deaterly. Don't worry. I haven't forgotten about you. Yeah, we'll come back to this. We got plenty of time. And so that's where, to me, that's the strangest part, that you couldn't go anywhere, that you were pinned, because I understand your point about the waste area behind you, but immediately to your right is allegedly where you're claiming Mr. Jacobson is, correct?
Correct, and I was backing slowly in that direction, watching the dog as it was circling around and trying to get at me.
So,
Yelling for the owner, thinking that maybe he would find it within himself to approach.
And-
Tell the dog to sit.
and
Tell the dog to
okay,
stay.
and would it be fair to say that Mr. Jacobson did eventually approach?
Yeah, after all was said and done with.
But yet, you said, okay, during this whole thing, he walked up and he was right next to you, correct?
didn't see him
Objection,
there.
mischaracterizes the witness's prior testimony.
All right, restate the question.
You heard Mr. Jacobson say during his testimony that he was shoulder to shoulder with you, correct?
That's what he said. He says a lot of things.
Okay, but if he wasn't shoulder to shoulder with you, you've heard Mr. Jacobson's voice. How would you be able to hear him when he said, "Did you just shoot your dog, my dog?" If he wasn't 3 feet from you, Mr. Deaterly?
Because he was right behind me.
Right behind you or right next to you?
I'm saying behind me.
Okay, but wouldn't it be fair to say that he was only a few feet from you when he said that?
Objection calls for speculation. Obviously, the witness can't see anything that's behind him.
Sustained.
So your testimony is, Mr. Deaterly, that a dog Mr. Jacobson loved more than life, was his best friend, decided to stand there and watch you shoot his dog, correct?
Yes.
Immediately following the shooting, Mr. Jacobson went to his boat, correct?
From what I can tell, yes.
And you heard Dr. Ellis testify, correct?
Yes.
And Dr. Ellis testified that the bullet went in from one side and stayed in Candy the dog, correct?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say that that bullet had to go in, that dog had to be angled from a side for it to actually enter, correct? Where it did.
Objection calls for speculation.
Yeah, sustained.
And immediately following Mr. Jacobson going to his boat, what did you do?
Stood there in shock.
Okay. But you weren't still so shocked as to yell obscenities, correct?
I think obscenities are a natural reaction to fear.
Calling somebody a goddamn moron is a natural reaction to fear?
Have you never had something traumatic happen to you, Mr. DePanic?
I'm the one who asked the questions, Mr. Deaterly. Move to strike non-responsive.
Oh, Mr. Deaterly, he gets to ask the questions.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Okay, so you're standing there. Did Rod eventually come back from the boat?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Did he come back with Candy in his arms?
He came back carrying the dog, yes.
What observations did you make of Candy the dog when she was walking back?
She looked injured.
Okay, and what was Rod's demeanor like?
Threatening.
And threatening.
He looked at me and said, if something happens to this dog, you're going to be in big trouble. He drew out the big.
Okay, and you said he pointed out a finger at you, correct?
He said it again after he put the dog in the truck.
Okay. And you were angry too, Mr. Deaterly, weren't you?
I was angry I was put in that situation, yes.
You were also angry that something on what you considered to be your property was roaming around, correct? Unleashed.
I was irritated that it attacked me, yes.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Showing defense counsel what's been previously admitted as Exhibit 6. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is Candy the dog, isn't it, Mr.
It is.
Deaterly? And this is her dead, correct?
That's correct.
And this is her dead at your hand, correct?
Sadly, yes.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Deaterly, we're here in court because of a lawsuit, right?
Correct.
Do you know when this lawsuit began?
Was it 2017 it got filed in, or? I know the incident happened in November 2016. So,
August 2017, sound about right?
about right, yes.
So this lawsuit's been pending for almost 5 years?
A little more than that. Yeah.
And is this something that you've had to live through every day as a result of living through this lawsuit?
Yes.
So when you heard Mr. Tympanic ask you if this is, you're somehow miraculously remembering this 5.5 years later, is that true?
No, because I relive it every damn day. Excuse me. Sorry, Your Honor.
And during the course of this lawsuit, did you have your deposition taken?
Yes.
And do you recall when that was?
I believe 2018?
And would it have been early 2018?
Yes.
And Mr. Deaterly, is this the first time you've told your story?
It's the first time I have.
In 5.5 years?
In 5.5 years.
When you shot the dog, it was close to you, correct?
Very close.
Okay. It wasn't immediately when it came out of the bushes, was it?
No.
And did you shoot the dog when it was right in front of you?
Right in front of me, yes.
You heard Mr. Jacobson testify during his testimony that you made the comment that you would do it again. Did you make that comment to Mr. Jacobson?
No, I don't ever want to have this happen again.
And Mr. Deaterly, did you shoot the dog in self-defense?
I did.
And is that because you had no other choice?
I had exhausted all options. Yes, I had nowhere to go.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's all I have.
No recross, Your Honor, necessary.
Okay. You can step down, sir. We see counsel here. So if you could, return so we can commence trial starting at 1:30. All right. So leave your pads on the chairs and we'll see you back at 1:30.
Jurors exiting.
Okay, again, if there's any authority, case law that you'd like me to look at, you have available now before we have our argument this afternoon. I'd appreciate providing so I can use an hour to review. I've seen your memo already on the assault.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. And do you still have the notebook that we provided you with the proposed jury instructions, Your Honor, with the case law?